The storm had rolled over the baranga jungle like a living creature, tearing branches from the canopy and turning the river below into a violent roaring monster. Thunder shook the mountains as if the earth itself were warning every living thing to take shelter. But in the heart of that chaos, a single sound cut through the storm. High, fragile, and terrified, a baby gorilla was clinging to a slick rock in the middle of the raging river. The moment he appeared in the tent, everything changed. His small body spun, crashed against the water, fought to rise again. The last surge of the storm had swept him for the forest edge, snatching him away from the safety of his mother's arms. Now soaked and trembling, he clung to life with fingers barely strong enough to hold on to the smooth stone music beneath him. On the river bank, his family erupted in panic. The silver-backed, massive, powerful, usually uncheckable, beat his chest with a force that cracked through the storm's roar. His bellows echoed off the cliffs, not as a threat, but as a desperate cry for help. The mother leaned dangerously over the edge, music stretching her arms toward the water as if she could pull the river apart with grief alone. Younger gorillas circled behind them, trembling, pacing their calls sharp and frantic. They were helpless, and they knew it. The current was too strong, the water too deep, the storm too merciless. Across the bank, a man named Elias Ward had been making his way along the trail, his boot sinking into the mud, his breathing thick with the scent of rain. Soaked earth. He had seen storms reshape entire valleys before, but nothing prepared him for the sight of the tiny gorilla fighting for life, or the paralyzing fear in the eyes of its family. Beside him stood Rowan, his loyal caramel-colored dog, alert, tense, ears pinned forward. Thunder cracked again, shaking loose debris from the branches above. Elias's eyes locked onto the drowning infant, and something inside him dropped into free fall. He didn't think. He ran. Mud splashed against his legs as he sprinted toward the river bank, shouting into the wind, his voice swallowed instantly by the storm. He grabbed a fallen branch, wide and long enough to reach across the water, or so he hoped. Kneeling dangerously close to the river's edge, he extended it toward the child, but the river didn't care about hope. The current ripped the branch straight from his hands, spinning it into the churning foam until it vanished downstream. Another wave crashed against the rock. The baby gorilla slipped. His fingers slid off the stone once, twice, each time catching again by sheer instinct. His head dipped below the surface, swallowed by the brown chaos before popping up with a choking gasp. Elias's stomach twisted. The little one was running out of time. The gorilla family roared louder, their desperation vibrating through the ground beneath Elias's knees. The silverback's booming chest beats sounded like a war drum calling for a miracle. The mother let out a scream so raw it cut straight through the storm and straight into Elias's chest. He scanned the bank frantically. No rope, no vine long enough, no fallen trunk he could drag into place. Jumping in would be suicide. He had seen water like this swallow grown men without leaving a trace. The storm dimmed around him, yet the urgency sharpened into something cold and exact. He turned toward Ron, who stood only a few feet behind him. The dog's gaze flicked from Elias to the drowning gorilla and back again. Lightning illuminated his eyes, steady focus, frighteningly aware of what was happening. "Not you," Elias whispered, shaking his head. Not this time. The baby gorilla slipped again, and this time longer. His hands slid, catching the stone by a single finger, his eyes closed, water filling his mouth, his tiny body convulsing with exhaustion. The world held its breath. Rowan moved. First, he stepped forward, slow, deliberate, as if weighing his own life against the one in the river. Helpless reached for him, voice breaking as he begged him to stop. But Rowan looked back at him only once, and in that single glance, Elias saw something he would remember for the rest of his life. A decision. Rowan sprinted. Elias shouted after him, but the words drowned in the whine. The dog reached the lowest point of the bank, a tangle of roots and mud, and without hesitation leapt into the churning water. The splash was violent, swallowed instantly by the storm scream. Elias's heart dropped. Rowan disappeared beneath the surface for a long, unbearable moment. Then, with a burst of strength that defied the river's fury, he resurfaced and began swimming, not against the current, but across it, cutting through the water in an angled path born of instinct and courage. The gorilla family froze, watching him with wild eyes. The baby gorilla lost his grip again, slipping entirely into the river. Helpless felt something inside him break, but Rowan saw everything. He lunged, kicking hard, pushing against waves big enough to crush him. The river tried to bury him, hammering him with branches, logs, and spinning debris, yet he fought through it, his wet coat plastered against his body, his exhausted breaths ragged but relentless. He reached the tiny gorilla. Just as the child surfaced for what might have been the final time, the baby stretched out a trembling hand, brushing Rowan's soak for before sinking again. Rowan dove after him. The silverback roared a sound so powerful it rattled the leaves from the trees. Helpless ran along the bank, slipping, falling, getting back up, shouting Rowan's name into the storm. But the dog didn't look back, not once. The baby gorilla resurfaced, clinging now barely to Rowan's back. The dog adjusted, lowering his body in the water, letting the child anchor himself. The current pulled them, both threatening to drag them into the deeper stretch of the river. Yet Rowan pushed forward, stroke by stroke, breath by breath, life against death, and the storm watched in silence as a simple dog became something else entirely, a spark of hope in a world drowning in chaos. The opening of a miracle no one on that riverbank would ever forget. Rowan had always been steady in a crisis, a dog with the uncanny ability to read danger before anyone else, but nothing Elias had ever witnessed, not in years of trekking through the forest near Varanget, prepared him for the moment. Rowan committed himself fully to a river that had swallowed entire trees without hesitation. It wasn't the instinct alone, it wasn't the obedience. It was something far rarer, something Elias would struggle to put into words for the rest of his life. It was courage chosen, deliberate, impossible to ignore. The storm's remnants howled across the river as Rowan swam, carving his way through the chaos in sharp, calculated strokes. His caramel coat clung to his lean frame, his ears pinned flat against his head, his eyes laser focused on the tiny gorilla clutching his back. Nothing else existed in that moment. Not the violent current, not the log slamming into the water around him, not the cold that turned every breath into a battle. Elias could only run along the bank, helplessly calling out Rowan's name as if the sound alone could keep him afloat. He stumbled over rocks and roots, his boots sliding across slick mud. But Rowan didn't turn back once, not even when the river tried to twist him under, not even when a branch struck his flank hard enough to draw a gasp from. Elias, the gorilla family watched from the opposite bank in stunned silence. Their cries had softened into something different: uncertainty, awe, a fragile spark of hope. The silverback, powerful and fierce, had stopped pounding his chest. Instead, he stood motionless as a statue, his massive form trembling ever so slightly. His eyes never left Rowan, as if the dog's every movement determined the fate of his own blood. The mother leaned out as far as she dared over the river's edge, following the tiny rise and fall of her baby's head against Rowan's soaked fur. She made a sound unlike the desperate screams from earlier, a soft taking rumble that carried both fear and gratitude, a sound that belonged more to prayer than panic. Rowan pushed forward. Sometimes a wave crashed over him, rolling him sideways, dragging him under just long enough for Elias's heart to stop. But each time Rowan resurfaced, coughing, blinking hard through the burning sting of debris and sediment, adjusting his angle before the river could steal him away. He wasn't swimming blindly. He wasn't fighting the currents like a frantic animal clinging to survival. He was studying, choosing, adapting like a creature born to outsmart water itself. Elias finally reached a bend in the river where the banks sloped downward into a narrow, boot-lined shelf. It was their best chance, a possible landing point. Rowan was drifting toward it, but the question was whether he had enough strength left to reach it. Elias shouted, "Rowan, this way. Keep coming, boy." The dog lifted his head just enough to see him. Even from a distance, Elias recognized the look. Not fear, not confusion, but determination. Rowan angled his strokes again. The baby gorilla clung tighter, small fingers trembling against Rowan's spine. A sudden surge of current barreled toward them. Rowan braced as best he could, but the force sent him spinning. Elias felt a knife of dread twist through him as the dog disappeared under the water, the baby gorilla sliding dangerously toward the river's center. Elias screamed, lunging toward the edge as if he could leap in and change the outcome with his hands alone. Then Rowan broke the surface again, gasping, fighting, refusing to surrender. He didn't try to regain his earlier angle immediately. He steadied himself, first regaining balance the only way he could, by letting the river move around him instead of through him. He waited, then turned with the next pocket of gentler water and let it carry him toward the roots. Elias realized then what separated Rowan from every heroic story he'd ever heard. Rowan didn't act out of instinct. Rowan acted out of understanding. He knew the river, he knew the stakes, and he had made a choice. The baby gorilla was slipping again. His fingers were too small, too tired to numb. He let out a thin, choking cry that rattled Elias to his core. Rowan felt that fear. Elias could see the shift in him. The dog swam harder, faster, forcing strength out of muscles that had long since begun to fail. His paws scraped the first root, only to slip. The current yanked him backward. Elias felt tears sting his eyes, but Rowan lunged again. This time he sank his claws into a crack in the bark, holding on with everything he had left. The current pulled at his hind legs, the weight of the baby gorilla dragging him lower. But he held. His body trembled ferociously. He lifted his head, water streaming from his snout, chest rising and falling in desperate bursts. Elias splashed into the river up to his waist, reaching for him. "Yuri." "Almost there," he called, voice breaking just a little more. "Rowan." The dog closed his eyes as if gathering the last fragments of strength left in He pushed upward, bracing the baby gorilla with his back, lifting him higher, higher, high enough for Elias to reach. Elias scooped the infant into his arms, holding him as carefully as if he were lifting a newborn child. The little gorilla clung helplessly to his shirt, coughing weakly, but he was alive. Rowan collapsed against the roots, his chest heaving in ragged gas. Eyeless dropped to his knees beside him, overwhelmed by a wave of emotion so powerful it made his hands tremble. He touched Rowan's soaked fur, whispering, "You did it. You brave, incredible boy, you did it." Across the river, the gorilla family erupted, not in screams of fear, but in thunderous cries of relief. The silverback roared with a force that shook the treetops. But this time the sound carried gratitude instead of terror. The mother dropped to all fours, trembling violently, tears mixing with the rain as she reached toward her reunited child. Rowan lifted his head just enough to see the infant safe in Elias's arms. Then, exhausted but triumphant, he laid it back down, letting the river's roar fade into the background. He had chosen courage, and the world in that moment felt humbled by him. Even the storm seemed quieter for it. Nature did not come after Rowan's heroic struggle. It escalated as if the storm itself refused to let the story end in a single moment of courage. Eyeless barely had time to steady the trembling baby gorilla in his arms before the world around them shifted again, reminding him that the river was only one enemy. The jungle had more, and they were not done. The sky above them darkened to a bruised purple, thick with swollen clouds that swallowed what little daylight remained. A distant rumble moved through the canopy, low and ominous. The storm was regrouping. Elias felt the weight of it in the air, that strange electric heaviness that comes before something catastrophic. Rowan, still lying stretched across the roots, lifted his head weakly, ears twitching. His instincts had returned to alertness even before his strength had. He caught the scent first. He always did. His nose tilted toward the trees, toward a presence neither Elias nor the gorilla sensed yet. On the opposite tank, the gorilla family gathered tightly around the mother and her infant. But their relief did not last long. That silverback, who only moments earlier had stood tall and a roar of gratitude, suddenly stiffened. His nostrils flared. His massive head turned sharply to the left. His chest rose in a slow, powerful inhale that ended in a deep warning rumble. Elias followed his gaze and felt his stomach drop. Not 20 yards away, half concealed by the wet ferns and storm-blackened shadows, a large male leopard crouched low, muscles coiled like springs. Its golden coat was slick with rain, its tail twitching with predatory clear's throat patience. Its eyes were locked on one target, the infant gorilla in Elias's arms. The river rescue had provided noise, confusion, vulnerability, and predators. In storms hunted opportunity, not fairness. Elias clutched the infant tighter, pulse racing. Rowan pushed himself upright, staggering at first, but finding strength somewhere beneath. Exhaustion, his growl vibrated through the soaked earth, a low, unwavering sound that signaled one truth: he would not allow another threat to come this close. The leopard took one silent step forward and then another. The gorilla family panicked. The mother staggered backwards, shielding her baby against a tree. The other shrieked and scrambled. But it was the silverback, immense, powerful, fierce, who charged first. His roar ripped through the rainforest like thunder. The leopard froze, startled by the sudden explosion of dominance, but the storm answered louder. A deafening crack split the sky as lightning struck a tree not far from the river bank. The blast set splinters raining down. Clear's throat, the ground shook. Birds erupted into panicked flight, and then rain, relentless, punishing, poured in. Sheets so thick the entire forest blurred into a spinning watercolor of brown, green, and silver. The river rose. Instantly, Elias felt the surge before he saw it. Water swelled over his boots, curling around Rowan's paws, licking at the roots that had saved their lives minutes before. The river was transforming again, no longer a single current, but a fast-moving flood. He needed higher ground. He needed it now. Rowan, move. Elias shouted over the roar. The dog pushed up, trembling, but determined. Elias felt the infant gorilla cling to his shirt, tiny fingers digging desperately into fabric. The baby was shivering violently. Too much cold, too much fear, too much water. Swallowed. Elias pressed the child tighter against his chest, shielding him with his body. He had to get the little one back to its family. They de-risked everything to save him, and Rowan had nearly died doing what no human or animal was obligated to do. But nature was not finished testing them. A violent swell of water surged around the bend. Logs, massive, uprooted pieces of ancient trees careened through the river like battering rams. If the roots they stood on were hit, they would be torn loose, and all three of them would be swept away. The silverback roared again, this time not in warning, but in terror. The water on his side of the river was rising too fast, too fast. His troops scrambled up the slope, but he stayed low, pounding his fists into the mud and willing to leave without knowing where his child had gone. Elias lifted the baby gorilla as high as he could so the silverback could see him. The father as roar cracked raw, trembling, desperate. "We coming," Elias shouted, though his words were drowned instantly by the exploding storm. Rowan barked beside him, urging movement. Elias climbed the slick root, searching for footing on the eroding ground. Mud slid beneath him, water slapped at his legs. The earth moved in, hunger beneath each step. A new sound broke through the storm, a rumble, not thunder, not flood water, the rumble of shifting land. A landslide, a chunk of hillside gave way upstream, sending stones and broken branches tumbling into the river. The impact sent a shock wave of water rolling toward them with terrifying speed. Elias staggered as the surge hit. His foot slipped. The baby gorilla almost fell. Rowan lunged, bracing his shoulder against Elias's leg, stabilizing him with the last strength he had left. The dog saved them again. They pushed upward, crawling on hands and knees until they reached a higher ridge where the river couldn't reach. But safety was temporary. The infant needed its family, and the family needed him. Across the river, that silverback was trying to find a crossing, but the water was too violent. One wrong step and he'd be swept away. He screamed in frustration, pounding the earth. Elias scanned the bank desperately and saw it. A fallen tree had wedged itself diagonally between two boulders, forming a natural bridge. Narrow, slick, terrifying, but possible. Rowan saw it, too, and nudged Elias toward it. "You kidding?" Elias muttered. The river roared below the log like a mouth, waiting to swallow the first mistake. But there was no other option. Clutching the baby gorilla to his chest with one arm, Elias used his free hand to steady himself on the trembling log. Rowan stepped behind him, placing each paw with careful precision. His legs trembled from exhaustion, but his instincts remained sharp. He kept close enough that if Elias slipped, Rowan could shove him back onto the log. Wind slammed against them. Rain blurred their vision. The log creaked with every shift of weight. Halfway across, lightning cracked again. Elias froze. Rowan nudged his leg go. The encouragement worked. Step by agonizing step, Elias crossed, until the silverback's desperate cries echoed close enough to touch his soul. When he reached the far bank, the mother gorilla rushed forward, trembling arms outstretched, her eyes filled with aching terror and fragile hope. Elias sank to his knees and gently placed the baby in her waiting grasp. Her cry split the air. Eye broken, relieved beyond language, the silverback bowed his head, not in dominance, not in threat, but in gratitude. Rowan collapsed onto the mud beside Elias's chest. Heaving body spent, the silverback stepped closer, towering above the exhausted dog. Elias held his breath, but the silverback did not attack. He lowered his massive head and touched Rowan's wet fur with the gentlest, most reverent gesture an animal of his strength could offer. Respect, acknowledgement, a silent vow never to forget. Nature had tried to destroy them, but in the end, courage had carried them across every impossible moment, and the jungle itself, for one rare heartbeat, felt united, not by species, but by survival, gratitude, and an unspoken bond shared only by those who choose to save another life at the cost of their own. The jungle did not come immediately after the baby gorilla was returned, even as the silverback bowed his head to Rowan in a gesture clear as throat no human would have believed without witnessing. The storm still rumbled overhead, rolling its last echoes through the treetops. The air hung thick with the scent of wet earth, torn leaves, and the metallic tang of fear slowly dissolving into relief. Every creature present was trembling, some from exhaustion, some from shock, and some from the weight of understanding what had just happened. Elias felt it in his bones. The moment was sacred, fragile, the kind of silence that comes after something too big for the world to name. Rowan Lake collapsed beside him, sides heaving in desperate, ragged breaths, his fur heavy with river water. Each inhale sounded like it fought through a wall of pain. Elias knelt beside his companion, running a hand down the dog's trembling spine, trying to steady the rhythm of his breathing with quiet murmurs. "You still here?" Elias whispered, voice cracking. "You still fighting?" Rowan's eyes fluttered open, soft, dark, exhausted but alive. Across from them, the mother gorilla clutched her infant with an intensity that defied words. She held him to her chest as though she were trying to press him back into her own heartbeat. The baby, weak and dazed, reached up with trembling fingers to touch her cheek. That single gesture unraveled her completely. Her soft cries rose into the humid air, carrying echoes of an ancient grief and an ancient gratitude. The silverback moved with slow measured caution, not toward Elias, but toward Rowan. His massive shoulders shifted like boulders rolling under skin. Elias tensed instinctively, one arm posed protectively across Rowan's body. He trusted the gorilla's earlier gesture, but instinct reminded him how quickly wild judgment could turn. But the silverback's posture was not threatening. Each step was deliberate, heavy, almost ceremonial. He stopped only a few feet from Rowan, lowered his head, and breathed out a deep rumbling sound. Not a warning, not a clear throat roar, but something older, something instinctively understood respect and acknowledgement. That the small creature before him had done what even he with all his power could not. Rowan tried to lift his head again, but it wavered and he sank back into the mud. The silverback watched him with a gaze far too human in its comprehension. For a brief second, their eyes locked, apex guardian of the forest meeting the battered hero who had defied a river. In that moment, the gorilla made a choice. He placed his hand, not aggressively, not with ownership, onto the ground between them. A gesture of truce, a gesture of gratitude, a gesture rarely offered, even among their own kind. Elias felt something inside him break open at that sight. The jungle seemed to breathe with them, as though even the trees had paused their ancient roots, humming with recognition. But Rowan needed help. The adrenaline that had kept him alive through the rescue was gone, leaving behind a fragile, exhausted body. His breath rattled painfully. His pulse shook violently, as though the cold of the river still clung to every inch of him. Eyeless checked him as best he could. No broken bones, but bruises, cuts, and dangerous exhaustion. "We need to get him warm," Elias murmured. His hands were trembling now, too, not just from exertion, but from fear of what could still go wrong. He wanted to survive like this. The gorilla family watched closely. Even the baby, barely conscious, opened his eyes enough to tear at the dog who had carried him through death. The mother held him a little tighter, murmuring soft, breathy sounds only he could understand. Elias gathered sticks and broken branches scattered by the storm. His hands moved quickly, automatically. Years of trekking in dangerous landscapes had trained him to build fire even under impossible conditions. Rowan shivered harder as a gust of wind swept across the clearing, carrying the cold river-s ghost with it. Eyeless placed more branches in a small pile, struck his fire starter, and prayed to the dryness inside the wood. The first spark died. The second failed too. The third, by some miracle, caught a flicker of flame, brightened the shadows warm and gold. Rowan's ears twitched toward it. Elias gently wrapped his companion in his jacket, lifting him closer to the fire without crowding his burns or sore muscles. The heat slowly reached him, blowing across his wet fur. Rowan exhaled shakily, a sound halfway between relief and pain. From the edge of the clearing, the mother gorilla approached, not fully, but close enough that her shadow touched the firelight. She did not fear the flames. She seemed to understand their purpose. She bent slightly, bringing her infant closer. The baby's small eyes fluttered open as he gazed at Rowan and Elias through the glow. The silverback remained at a distance, but he watched everything with a stern protectiveness, ensuring his family and this strange dually remained safe. It was a strange tableau, a human, a dog, and a family of gorillas gathered around the same fragile warmth. Nature had placed them on opposite sides of instinct, but compassion had pulled them into the same firelight. Elias fed the flames, adding branches carefully, his fingers numb from cold and fear. Rowan shifted slightly, resting his head against Elias's knee. His breathing steadied, though each breath still dragged. Elias rubbed Rowan's ears, whispering encouragement, gratitude, love, every emotion that had no other outlet. "You saved a life today," he whispered. "You saved all of us." A soft rustle broke the moment. The mother gorilla moved closer again, not out of need, but out of solidarity. She sat just a few feet from Elias, her infant, reached toward him, weakly, fingers curling in the air. Elias extended a hand, not touching, just offering a gesture of reassurance. The baby touched his fingertips. A spark passed through Elias like lightning, a connection born from terror bonded through survival. That silverback let out a low rumble, approving, accepting. The forest absorbed the sound and returned it as a gentle hush. Time moved differently after that. The storm's rage faded into a distant mutter. The fire grew stronger. Rowan's shaking slowly eased, his breaths evening out. The silverback eventually settled into vigilant rest. The mother groomed her baby with trembling relief, and for the first time since the chaos began, Elias allowed himself to breathe deeply. He knew the forest would remember this day. He knew he would never forget. And as he watched Rowan finally lift his head to meet the silverback's gaze, Elias understood something profound. Heroism does not belong to strength alone. It belongs to those who act when every instinct says run, those who choose compassion over fear, those who place another life above their own. Rowan was no longer just a loyal companion. He was something far greater, a bridge between worlds that should never have touched. A survivor, a hero, and in the quiet aftermath, surrounded by a family that should have feared him but instead honored him. Rowan's courage carved a story into the heart of the jungle, one that would outlive every storm. The night did not give way to morning all at once. It softened slowly, the storm clouds thinning into bruised streaks of violet and gray as the first fragile hints of dawn touched the treetops. Elias had spent the long hours beside Rowan, feeding the fire when it dimmed, rubbing warmth back into the dog's cold limbs, murmuring reassurances. Even when Rowan drifted into shallow, exhausted sleep, across the clearing, the gorilla family had settled into a loose semicircle, vigilant but no longer frantic, their bodies forming a protective ring around the mother and her infant. Peace, delicate and temporary, rested over all of them like a thin veil. When the first beam of sunlight broke through the canopy and spilled across the forest floor, Elias felt it before he saw it, a gentle heat brushing his cheek, a warmth that did not belong to the fire. He looked up and watched dawn paint the clearing gold, the trees glistening with deeds of water from the storm, the air shimmering as if the jungle itself were breathing again. Rowan stirred at the same moment, raising his head with that soft whine. The light hit his damp fur, giving it a honey-warm glow. He blinked, groggy but alive, and nudged his nose against Elias's hand. Elias let out a breath he had been holding for hours, stroking the top of Rowan's head with a tenderness only fear can carve out. "You made it," he whispered. "You really made it." The silverback rose first, towering, powerful, but calm. He approached with slow, deliberate steps, stopping just short of Rowan and Elias. His breath misted faintly in the cool morning air. His eyes, deep as wells, carved through centuries of survival, studied Rowan with quiet reverence the dog did not recall. He lifted his chin, meeting that ancient gaze with one of his own, tired, trusting, and wavering. There was no sound, no dramatic movement, nothing that would have made sense to the outside world, just two beings from different universes, acknowledging each other's courage in a way only survivors can. The mother gorilla followed, cradling her infant. With one arm, while the other brushed gently along the forest floor, the baby stronger now, lifted its head and stared at Rowan with an innocence untouched by fear. The tiny hand reached out again, not in desperation this time, but in recognition. Rowan's ears twitched. He leaned forward just enough that the infant could touch the damp fur on his snout. It was the lightest of contacts, barely more than a breath-brushing flirt, but it held the entire story within it. Fear, loss, courage, and the fragile thread that had woven their lives together. The silverback made a soft sound, a deep rumble that vibrated in his chest. Elias had heard gorilla vocalizations before, but never one like this. It was neither warning nor dominance. It was acknowledgement, a vow, carved into the quiet morning that what happened here would not be forgotten. Elias felt something shift inside him. The river had almost taken everything, but somehow, against every calculation, every instinct of self-preservation, every barrier between species, compassion had prevailed. The gorillas retreated slowly after that, not out of fear, but out of understanding. They had their child back. Their family was whole again. The silverback turned toward the jungle and began the slow procession. Deeper into the trees, the mother walked behind him, holding her infant close. The others followed, but before vanishing into the dense green, the silverback paused once more. He turned his massive head and looked back at Rowan and Elias. A single deep exhale left his chest warm and resonant, like a final punctuation mark on a sacred moment. Then they were gone, swallowed by the jungle. Elias sat in the quiet that followed, one hand resting on Rowan's back. The adrenaline that had fueled him during the rescue was finally ebbing, replaced by a profound sense of awe and a trembling humility. He thought of how close everything had come to breaking, how the river could have written a very different ending, yet here they were sitting in a clearing, washed clean by the storm, watching sunlight catch on the edges of leaves like shards of gold. Rowan, still tired but no longer trembling, nudged Elias's knee. It was a simple gesture, but it carried an entire dictionary of meaning, loyalty, relief, and a bond strengthened by a night that neither of them would ever escape nor ever want to. "Let us get you home," Elias murmured. They walked slowly through the forest. The ground soft beneath their boots and paws. Birds began to call to one another, their songs echoing gently through the treetops. The world felt new, reborn in the wake of fear. Elias paused at the river once more, watching the water roll past. Not the monster it had been, though still powerful, still untamed. It seemed almost peaceful now, carrying the storm as remnants away. "People want tea. Believe this," he said quietly. Rowan looked up at him, tail giving the slightest wag despite his exhaustion. "But we lions remember. That's enough." As they continued toward their camp, Elias felt the lessons settle inside him with the weight of truth. Courage did not always roar. Sometimes it swam against a river in the dark. Sometimes it carried another life on its back. Sometimes it beat not in the chest of the mighty, but in the heart of a dog who refused to let fear decide the ending. Heroes were not born that night. One simply remembered what love required, and because of that choice, a baby gorilla briefed the family heel, and a sunrise spoke across the world with a promise that kindness, real selfless kindness, could bridge even the wildest divides. Rowan walked beside him, each step a quiet echo of everything they had survived together. A hero remembered, a friend forever. In the quiet that followed the storm, long after the gorilla family had disappeared into the emerald hush of the jungle, and Rowan had finally lain down to rest, the true weight of what happened began to settle. Not the weight of fear or exhaustion, those had already faded into memory, but the weight of meaning, because stories like this are never just about survival. They are never simply about a river, a dog, a man, and a frightened baby gorilla clinging to life. They are about us, about what we choose to become when no one is watching, when the world turns violent, when life hangs by a thread and instinct urges us to turn away. Elias knew this as he knelt beside Ron, running a hand gently through the dog's damp fur. Heroes aren't forged in comfort. They are revealed in the moments when turning back would be easier, safer, more rational. Rowan didn't he analyze the odds or calculate the danger. He didn't he wait for permission. He saw life slipping away and chose to swim toward it, and in that simple, instinctive act, he reminded everyone of the truth we often forget. Courage is not the absence of fear. It is choosing compassion over self-preservation. Even when the world grows dark and the current pulls hard, the gorilla family taught another kind of courage, the way the mother reached toward the river even as the waves threatened to swallow her child, the way the silverback's chest beating turned from fury to plea, an ancient language of desperation that crossed the boundary between species, and the way they waited, silent, trembling, hopeful as Rowan fought against a river far stronger than himself. Their cries were not words yet. They carried the same message every parent understands: please, someone help my child. In those cries we hear our own humanity reflected back at us, raw and unfiltered. And then there was Elias, an ordinary man in an extraordinary moment. He didn't leap into the river because he knew he would likely drown. But he didn't abandon the baby either. He stayed searching, guiding, shouting encouragement when Rowan needed it most. He stepped into the water when the time came. He carried the infant when its limbs finally gave out. Sometimes courage means being the hero. Sometimes it means being the one who refuses to leave the hero's side. If this story teaches anything, it is that goodness is not complicated. It does not need applause, nor reward, nor recognition. It requires only a willingness to see another creature suffering and say, "Not on my watch." Whether that creature is furry, fragile, or speaks a language we will never understand does not matter. Compassion does not ask for likeness. It asks for heart in a world that often feels divided and hardened. Rowan's bravery becomes more than a rescue. It becomes a reminder that loyalty still exists in its purest form, that love can leap into rivers without hesitation, that sometimes the smallest lives depend on the quiet courage of those who were never expected to save them. And perhaps the greatest lesson of all is this: you never know who will inspire you. A dog may show you the meaning of devotion. A wild gorilla may teach you trust. A man may show you that standing beside someone in their moment of truth can change everything. Nature speaks to us in ways we might overlook if we rush too quickly past the moments that matter. This story is not just a tale of survival. It is a call to choose kindness every time we are given a chance. It is a reminder that the world becomes safer, gentler, and more beautiful whenever one heart decides that another life, any life, is worth fighting for. If this journey moved you, if Rowan's courage touched something deep inside you, if the reunion of that gorilla family filled you with hope, then stay with us. There are so many more stories like this waiting to be told, stories that lift, stories that heal, stories that remind us how powerful compassion can be. So please take a moment to subscribe to the channel. Your support gives us the strength to keep sharing these incredible moments of connection between humans, animals, and the wild world we all share. Together, let us keep these stories alive and keep reminding the world that courage still exists, kindness still matters, and every life is worth the